My name is Rabbi Diana Gerson. I am the Associate Executive Vice President of the New York Board of Rabbis, the oldest and largest interdenominational rabbinic organization in the world today. Pluralistic by nature, founded by a group of rabbis in New York City 140 years ago, with members today spanning the globe. In 2005, I was asked to come and work with the New York Board of Rabbis and help develop our initiative on family violence prevention, and quickly realized that it wasn't just about family violence, but really addressing all issues of violence and abuse. We look at domestic violence, elder abuse, child sexual abuse, and sexual assault. We work with communities and congregations to help them overcome the challenges, finding the words. How do we talk about these issues in safe, sacred spaces? Because we know that when we talk about it, we make our communities safer for everyone. In fact, our religions can all be either seen as a resource or as a roadblock to victims, survivors, and thrivers. We know that when we talk about these issues and within the context of our faith, we really change the dynamic in the lives of our communities. In 2001, I was ordained, and I was probably one of the youngest rabbis in the country at the time. I was 27, and I was well received in my congregation in Atlanta. And I arrived, and I was literally one of the only rabbis in town during the summer. Most had gone on vacation. A woman came to me needing help. And the first thing she told me was that she was not a member of my synagogue. In fact, she belonged to a neighboring congregation, but was asking for my help. And I was more than happy to provide the assistance and to listen to her story, and realized very quickly that I had a sacred obligation to help. I had to figure out in a new community, who do I call? Because she was presenting with domestic violence. I helped connect her with the local resources and quickly realized I needed to get connected. I needed to find out who the advocates were. I needed more education. I had 5 years of seminary training and yet never really heard about these issues in the classroom. I reached out to Reverend Marie Fortune at the Faith Trust Institute and quickly started my education. But at the same time, I realized that my voice as a leader could make a big difference. As this woman who would come to me that summer, I watched her over the next 2 years find her way, walk her journey, and kept my door open for whenever she needed me. And I knew that this was an important relationship, and I couldn't put it aside. I needed to make sure she was okay. And the following year, I decided on the Jewish Super Bowl, the Jewish Super Bowl being Yom Kippur. That's the biggest, most sacred day of the Jewish calendar. I gave a sermon talking about family violence. And I spoke about this from the pulpit in front of 6,000 people, and people were shocked. How could I talk about this? How can I talk about this on this most sacred day? But I talked about the road to forgiveness and the challenges that we face. Forgiveness is a word that people interpret in many different ways. But for me, it was about the forgiveness of self, finding a pathway towards healing. And I knew in that moment that I had done something transformational. I had used my faith in our traditions and our sacred holiday as a resource for our community. And I decided religion was never going to be a roadblock for those who needed our help. And so I realized in the next few days how quickly my sermon had changed the conversation in the community. And in fact, my schedule was filled with people coming to me asking for help, and people coming to me with issues of all different natures. But people in our communities are in need of being heard, need of being seen, need of really feeling connected. And so the role of faith leaders, especially in terms of working with victims, survivors, and thrivers of child sexual abuse, we know that we have a sacred task. One, it's truth telling. We need to create a sacred space that allows people to actually tell their truth, to be heard, to be seen. We need to believe the victims and survivors. We have to know that this is what they're telling us is the tip of the iceberg. We need to hold abusers accountable for their actions. We don't victim blame. We create a safe healing space within our communities, and we refer people to the resources. It's so important that we do all four of these things, because if we leave one out, it means that we leave someone feeling disconnected. And we have to recognize very quickly that we have to fulfill our moral mandate to support survivors in their healing, and that faith leaders and the faith community needs to be that resource. I knew that in those days in 2002, 2003, in my congregation, I needed to be that resource. In fact, every month they knew that on Friday night, the first Friday night, I was going to give a sermon, and I was going to talk about the context of family violence. I was going to talk about child sexual abuse within the context of our faith traditions. And by normalizing those conversations, it meant that this was a safer place for people to come. This meant that they were seen, they were heard, and by creating a space for them to actually come together. It's so important that we do this because we can acknowledge our own experiences and offer referrals to child advocacy centers and experts in health care and expert healthcare providers, but we first need to know who the resources are. We have to be connected ourselves, and as we create that safe space, we also have to recognize that we're not experts. Most faith leaders are not experts in this field, and by nature, we are fix-it people. Faith leaders like to know what the problem is, see how we can fix a problem, and move on to the next issue. And the reality is that working with victims and survivors, we're not the expert, but we do have a responsibility. So we know that we are part of the journey. It's our responsibility to walk that journey with them, to not tell them what to do, but to actually be part of their healing process. It's so, so important that we as the faith leaders first build those relationships. When you arrive in a new community, it's all relationship, relationship, relationship. I knew that when I was in Atlanta and I didn't know anybody and I had to get to know them quickly, I picked up the phone and I said, I need you to come to my office, or I'll come to you, and I want to meet people and I need to know what my resources are in the community. I want to know that I can pick the phone up and I've got your phone number, because I want to know that when I refer somebody to you, that they're going to be seen and heard, and that connection will actually help them in their process. We have to know that advocates and healthcare professionals are our allies in this work. No one can do this alone. We can't be going and say, oh, we'll handle this in-house, and the other side can't say, oh, don't worry, you don't need the faith community to help you with this. We know that faith is such an important part of healing for all people. In fact, faith might be as important as anything else. I don't know anyone who fully heals without faith. We have to acknowledge that advocates want what's best for your congregants, and we are all on the same team. So when we're working together and we know each other, back to that relationship, it really does make a profound difference. And we have to know both advocates and clergy have things to teach and to learn. So wherever we can build those bridges, we can study together, learn together, discover best practices together. Even I often think about how we can co-locate some of the services. Perhaps you bring a social worker into the congregation some of the time. Perhaps you have a healing group meet in the house of worship. And by doing so, we send a very clear message that this is a house of worship. This is a community who cares about these issues. We make this our priority. And how incredible is that we can make this a priority for everyone? We know that building a caring congregation is all about what kind of sign is in our windows. We know that healthy, thriving congregations are places that share these issues. We talk about it. We have that co-located person. We have a healing group. We are also putting forward our safety protocols, and we're making them present. When I was a child, I loved waiting for the milkman. We'd put the empty glass bottles at the front door, and the milkman would come and bring fresh milk. If you wanted fresh fish, you would put the happy clam sign in the window. And all my neighbors, you would see on Tuesdays, you would see the happy clam sitting in their window. And that meant they were waiting for the fish man to bring fish. Well, what kind of sign are we putting in our window? What are we telling our community? What's on our website? What's on our Facebook page? What messages are we sending out? And we need to think about that. What are our protection policies and safety mechanisms that we have in place? What are we actively doing? When we're hiring, when we're bringing in volunteers, what are our policies and protocols? How do we work in and around children? If all congregations are youth organizations as well, because our children are the most sacred part of our faith communities. How does your community support the spiritual healing of victims and survivors? Are we having that group? Do we talk about this on holidays? Do we give sermons about this? Do we have that open door policy? Do we offer that support group? Do we talk about it? What kind of sermons are you offering? What kind of programs are you giving? What kind of things are you even doing with your youth as you're educating them? How do we talk about healthy relationships and healthy boundaries? How do we do that within a faith context? Highlighting our sacred texts and what it tells us about what a happy, healthy relationship can and should be. It's an amazing thing when kids come and learn together. We have children of different ages learning together. We sometimes bring them together from across the faith spectrum because we have so much more in common than we have that's different. And so when we think about what we're doing and how we do it and what we can do and what we can offer our communities, I can only tell you this, and I will conclude with a short story. In 2002, I gave that sermon on domestic violence from the pulpit, and I talked about the road to forgiveness. And my congregation kind of shifted after that moment. My schedule was full, people coming to me to share their stories and explain what they were going through. But in 2018, I received an email. And that email was from a gentleman who had been there that day and heard my sermon on Yom Kippur morning. And in his email, he told me that it was this sermon that changed his life. That he finally had come to terms with the child sexual abuse he had endured in his youth. He sought out the help that he needed. He connected to resources and other survivors. He found his way forward. And he shared his story. He sent me photos of his life. And he said, I would not be here today. I would not have this full and rich life if you hadn't had the courage to stand on the pulpit and give a sermon that was so controversial in 2002. Well, it's been 20 years since I was ordained, and the world has changed a lot. What I do know is that clergy are resources in their jobs. We are wonderful partners with working with our allies in this work in the secular community, and we have to be working together. I always think that we must find the words to talk about the most difficult things, because if we don't as clergy have that courage, how can we ever expect those who are suffering to find the courage to heal? Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to continuing this work and walking this road together. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Cardinal Blase Cupich, the Archbishop of Chicago. It has been good to hear from other faith leaders on their work in preventing and healing child sexual abuse. The Archdiocese of Chicago has been deeply engaged in this work for more than 30 years. I will tell you about our approach, but let me first share a story that has served as a point of reference for me. It's at the core of my convictions and is what motivates me when it comes to protecting children. Years ago, when I was a bishop of a mostly rural small diocese, a successful middle-aged businessman came to see me. His story was heart-wrenching. Starting when he was just 9 years old, he explained, serving regularly at Sunday Mass, that the parish priest would have him stay afterward, ostensibly to help clean up. But this priest had a darker purpose. He would take the young boy into the church basement and sexually abuse him, week after week. And then this priest, a man ordained to serve the people of God, would walk the boy home, hand in hand, and sit down to have dinner on Sunday with the family. One day the boy asked his mother, "What if Father asks me to do something that I don't want to do?" His devout mother, thinking the child was talking about avoiding chores, replied, "Whatever Father asks you to do, you have to do it." And so he did, for 4 agonizing years. Finally, the boy found the courage to tell his father what was going on, and the abuse ended. It was, as you might imagine, a profoundly painful thing to share. After the man finished telling his story, I said, "Just tell me what I can do. What do you want me to do?" He told me that he wanted to confront the priest, to lay this burden at his feet. He had carried it too long. When he did, the priest did not deny it. I also asked if I could go to his home parish and tell the parishioners what had happened. He said, "Yes, and I'll come with you." So after informing the local police and the Vatican, we visited the parish. I explained what their former priests had done and invited other victims to come forward. Then I walked to the church vestibule where photos of former priests hung, and I removed the priest's picture. Soon afterwards, I notified or visited the other places where the priest had served and asked other victims to come forward. It was a moment of great pain, but that survivor's courage forced me to be an adult in a way I had never experienced. That encounter convinced me that there should be no place in the church for leaders who misuse power or expect privilege or protection because of their status. I have carried the memory of that man for nearly 20 years through another diocese bankrupted by the abuse scandal, and finally to Chicago, where the Archdiocese has had a leading, comprehensive, and sustained role in responding to the clergy abuse scandal. In the late 1980s, abuse survivors began to come forward in greater numbers. Understanding that this phenomenon demanded a new approach, Cardinal Joseph Bernardin convened a lay commission in 1991 to review the archdiocesan procedures for handling accusations of sexual abuse. The following year, the Archdiocese put in place policies and procedures to address allegations and issues related to the sexual abuse of minors. In 1992, Cardinal Bernardin presented and provided copies of these policies and procedures to all the United States Catholic bishops at their annual meeting. The response was decidedly mixed. Imagine if all the bishops at that meeting had taken those documents home and fully implemented them in their dioceses, how much further ahead we would be in preventing abuse and punishing offenders. How many children might have been spared? But Chicago's efforts did not stop at policies. The Archdiocese also dedicated substantial resources designed to put the child in the center of the room figuratively to carry out this ministry, and we do view it as a ministry. This department, the Office for the Protection of Children and Youth, brings together the various ministries within the Archdiocese dedicated to ensuring the safety of children and providing support to survivors. Within it are 4 areas of specialties. First, the Office of Victims Assistance. It provides direct outreach and support to survivors and their families. We believe it was the first office of this kind in the United States. It is not housed in a church or archdiocesan building, but in a large single-family home donated to the diocese. Its atmosphere is designed to avoid painful triggers and to put these individuals and their families at ease. Today, when a survivor comes forward, he or she is first offered the services of this ministry. They are able to access mental health care from our staff or from any licensed professional at the expense of the Archdiocese. This offer is made no matter when the abuse occurred, whether the accused is dead or alive, a diocesan priest, or a member of a religious order. Our staff, which includes a therapist and social workers, lead with a pastoral approach based on believing the survivor's story and acting immediately to help ease their pain. They take all the time needed to listen to and to hear the child within the adult before them. The office also includes an independent office, the Office of Child Abuse Investigations and Review. After the survivor is offered pastoral and professional care, this office notifies the appropriate civil authorities. It reports all possible abuse of a minor, regardless of legal requirements. By the way, we have reported every allegation of child sexual abuse, even anonymous third-party telephone calls alleging abuse, since 2002. And in 2002, we searched our files, gathered and reported every allegation we could find. Some were 70 years old. This office is headed by lay professionals who conduct a compassionate and thorough process for receiving and investigating reports of child abuse against archdiocesan personnel. The director of that office also serves as staff for the Independent Review Board, a lay majority, multidisciplinary group that advises me about an accused cleric's danger to children and fitness for ministry. Their task is not easy, given the often long time between the alleged abuse and survivors' reports. But they can use the services of professional investigators to form their recommendations. Nearly 250 recorded board meetings have been held over these years. Knowing that only prevention would stop this scourge, the Archdiocese also established the Safe Environment Office that oversees prevention of efforts through conducting training for adults and children and developing resources to educate archdiocesan clergy, employees, and volunteers on how to prevent child sexual abuse, how to recognize sex offender behavior, and how to create safe environments for children and youth. Since 2003, 270,000 adults have been trained in 3,800 training sessions. We know that most abuse occurs in the home or at the hands of a family member or a friend. So we believe that preparing kids to confront this sad reality is our responsibility. Archdiocesan parishes and schools are required to provide training to children and youth on how to recognize, respond to, and report grooming or abuse, no matter where or by whom it occurs. Students receive age-appropriate training in each grade annually. It instills in them the knowledge that they have a right to be safe, and if they don't feel safe, they have a right to report. Safe Environment Office personnel also screen through name-based background checks all clergy, employees, and volunteers. Office personnel also receive and review fingerprint results for school personnel. If they do not pass, they are not employed. We also have priest monitoring program for clergy with substantiated cases of sexual abuse against them. These men have been withdrawn from ministry permanently and are prohibited from presenting themselves as priests. They are required to comply with numerous invasive restrictions to help ensure safety for the community. It is certainly important that we have policies and procedures to organize the way we handle allegations of abuse. They have evolved over the past 3 decades and have stood the test of time. However, they are not a substitute for pastoral care. They help provide a framework for our pastoral care and are based on faith principles of justice, compassion, reverence for the dignity of each person, and recognition that we are all equal siblings of a loving God. By 2002, with the scandal in Boston prominent in the news, the Archdiocese of Chicago's 1992 principles formed the basis of what's now known as the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, which was approved by the United States bishops at their 2002 meeting in Dallas. The charter reinforced what the Archdiocese of Chicago had been doing for a decade by requiring all dioceses to heal and promote reconciliation of survivors and their families, no matter whether the abuse was recent or occurred many years in the past. Make prompt and effective response to abuse allegations. Cooperate with civil authorities. Discipline offenders. Create a safe environment for children and young people through training and screening. Provide means of accountability through an annual audit of the implementation of the Charter's requirements. We bishops must address forthrightly the degree to which we have kept the promises we made in 2002 with the adoption of the Charter. The bottom line is the Charter works if we actually implement it. I am confident the Archdiocese of Chicago is complying with those promises. In fact, we go beyond them. We cannot provide pastoral care for our people, particularly survivors and their families, if they do not trust us. I'm resolved that we will deal effectively with the crisis of abuse, take the steps necessary to rebuild trust, and build on the progress we have made to protect children. We would do well to remember that when Cardinal Bernardin, who broke ground in 1992 with the creation of our Victim Assistance Ministry, was accused of misconduct, he submitted himself to the Archdiocesan review process. Moreover, Cardinal Bernardin reached out to his accuser after he had recanted, and he prayed with the dying young man, offering pastoral care and reconciliation. This was a painful time, but his example speaks powerfully to us today. Like Cardinal Bernardin and me, Pope Francis is motivated to take up the work of making major reforms in large part by his meetings with survivors who bravely share their stories and deep pain. By his own admission, he has learned a great deal from those encounters. He has been decisive in removing cardinals and bishops, laicizing some for misconduct and removing bishops for their mishandling of cases. Pope Francis wants all the Church's leaders to not only have a full understanding of the devastating impact clerical sexual abuse has on survivors, but also to accept ownership at a national, regional, diocesan, and parish level for effectively addressing this issue in a way that keeps all children safe. It was nearly 20 years ago when that middle-aged businessman recounted how he was abused by one of my priests. As he spoke to me, I heard the voice of a 9-year-old boy who, though deeply wounded, had the courage to come forward and share his story. I was humbled by his trust and still am today. The voice of the survivor must be the Church's true north as we work to address this global scandal. Yes, ours is a church of many nations and many cultures, a diversity we must respect, but zero tolerance when it comes to harming children and full accountability are universal non-negotiables. These are not values to be held in the abstract or simply codified as a list of procedures to be ticked off as a matter of routine. No, they must be lived values. They must be values that permeate the very air we breathe as a church, so that everyone, from the volunteer, tutor, to the bishop, knows that building a culture of accountability, justice, and healing is essential to what it means to be church, to follow Christ's call. Pope Francis put it powerfully in his address to survivors during his 2015 visit to the United States. This is what he said: "The crimes and sins of the sexual abuse of children must no longer be held in secret. I pledge the zealous vigilance of the Church to protect children and the promise of accountability for all. You survivors of abuse have yourselves become true heralds of hope and ministers of mercy. We humbly owe each of you and your families our gratitude for your immense courage to shine the light of Christ on the evil of the sexual abuse of children." As a church, and especially as bishops, we must keep the promises made by the Holy Father and that we have made. We must never abandon survivors. We must never grow complacent. We must confront the truth and act to bring healing and justice to those who have been robbed of both. The Church stands as a sign of God's surpassing love, a love we Christians find in the person of Jesus. This is a moment to mature in knowing who Jesus is. When we look into the face of the survivor, we look into the very face of Jesus. Our prayer in this moment of sorrow and agony must be that the Lord deepen the Church's thirst for justice and healing, that we hold firm to our resolve to be the hands of God's mercy, reflecting with every step we take God's own love for His children. That is my prayer, confident and filled with hope that these two are gifts God has always wanted to give to His children. Thank you.
My name is Mustafa Yusuf Ali. I am Secretary General of the Global Network of Religions for Children, GNRC, and Director of Arigato International, Nairobi. I want to thank Harvard University for inviting me on behalf of the GNRC network to participate in this symposium on the role and importance of interfaith partnerships in preventing and healing from child sexual abuse. We appreciate faith leaders for taking time in participating in this historical event, an event that we all hope will catalyze work in preventing and healing children affected by sexual abuse and exploitation. Voices from religious leaders, faith communities, and spiritual traditions are voices of conscience. They possess resources, wealth of experiences, and influence, which, when deployed, can protect children from all forms of violence. In particular, concrete actions accompanying the voices from faith leaders effectively challenge and change situations that encourage violence against children. There are many situations that encourage or make it easy for children to be exploited, violated, and abused. Some of these are poverty and inequality, discriminatory gender and wider social norms, racism, exclusion and marginalization, media and advertising practices that contribute to tolerance of the sexualization of children, power imbalances, challenges related to conflicts, migration, and humanitarian crisis. Where there is a lack of effective legal frameworks and protection mechanism, sexual exploitation and abuse will thrive. Many children subjected to these situations often face violence. Their lives have been blighted by violence against them. When religious leaders and faith communities acknowledge and address these situations, they help prevent sexual exploitation and abuse of children. It is vitally important we protect children before they are violated. It is crucial that we protect children from harm before they are traumatized by actions of predators. The statistics on child sexual exploitation and abuse are numbing. Millions of children, including infants, are subjected to severe forms of abuse. The problem is getting more complex. The COVID-19 pandemic and measures to prevent the scourge have increased the risk of child sexual exploitation and abuse, both physically and online. Faith-based interventions, and in particular, interfaith partnerships, can go a long way in preventing and healing sexual abuse and exploitation. The New York Board of Rabbis, the oldest and largest interdenominational rabbinic organization in the world, works with congregations to develop protocols for dealing with child sexual abuse in the Family Violence Prevention Program it has been implementing since 2007. Through such programs, the New York Board of Rabbis evaluates that those in the congregation with intention to harm children normally opt to leave the community. Children stay safe and are protected from such predators. In Cambodia, the International Catholic Child Bureau, ICCB, an international Catholic organization, sensitize and mobilize communities and authorities on the risks of sexual abuse of children. ICCB provides training in the competencies required to detect cases of abuse and improve the judiciary treatment to child victims or survivors. The organizations also support resilience and the recovery of the child victim. In Sri Lanka, the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement recently launched a program to raise awareness on the issue of online sexual exploitation for boys and girls aged between 12 and 18 years old. Sarvodaya realized that most young people with access to cell phones and the internet had no idea of the potential negative consequences of social media. Interfaith partnerships can have significant impact in the prevention and healing of child sexual abuse. Members of the Global Network of Religions for Children around the world, including those that I've just mentioned, have prioritized the prevention aspects of sexual exploitation and abuse of children. At the GNRC Fifth Forum held in Panama, religious leaders and faith communities committed to ending the scourge of child sexual exploitation and abuse, scaling up responses and working together through existing and new partnerships. Today, we see much more being done to prevent child sexual exploitation and abuse. At the global level, GNRC partners with organizations such as the Interfaith Alliance for Safer Communities, together with faith institutions and tech companies, have joined hands to advocate for online child dignity. Tech companies in particular are now working to make online spaces safer for children and youth, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Tech companies are also increasingly working with security agencies in identifying the perpetrators of online child sexual exploitation and abuse. This is after faith leaders made specific calls to address the scourge of child sexual exploitation and abuse. Faith leaders can use religious scriptures to advocate against this scourge. Religious leaders and faith organizations can work with governments and professionals in developing policies, and government can implement those policies and laws that promote the well-being of children. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, a CRC study on faith and children's rights, a multi-religious study on the Convention on the Rights of the Child developed by Arigato International in collaboration with UNICEF, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General on Violence Against Children, World Vision, KAICID, and other partners specifically highlights the important role faith leaders and faith communities have played in the past and continue to play in advancing the rights and well-being of children. Religions for Peace, together with ECPAT, developed a handbook to help faith communities and religious leaders understand better the challenge of child sexual exploitation and abuse and how to effectively address the scourge. I encourage community stakeholders to utilize these important tools as a guide and advocacy in all their actions with and concerning children. At the national and grassroots levels, GNRC members around the world, from the Dominican Republic, Uganda, Philippines, Sri Lanka to Tanzania, have come together to deploy their moral and spiritual assets to prevent and heal sexual exploitation and abuse. More needs to be done. Together, we can prevent more children from being harmed. Together, we can reach the most excluded and vulnerable children. Together, we can help heal more children where harm has occurred. And most importantly, when we deploy our religious resources together, we learn from each other, we encourage each other, and are more accountable in helping prevent child sexual exploitation and abuse. Thank you.
Facilitating resilience and healing for those impacted by child sexual abuse. My name is Julio Murray, and I'm the Bishop of the Anglican Episcopal Church in Panama. A word of gratitude to the organizers of the symposium, and also gratitude to the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard's Institute for Quantitative Social Services, as they have invited us to be part of this event. On the morning of February 12 of the year 2021, there was this troubling news on the local media. Members of the Commission for Women, Children, Youth and Family of the National Assembly of Panama delivered to the head of the Public Prosecutor's Office a report on alleged abuse of minors who were under the responsibility of the state in children's shelters in this country. 2 days after this, one of the members of the said commission from the National Assembly invited religious leaders, NGO representatives, and other civil society foundations that they have worked with children to be present at the opening session of a meeting to present proposals on the law for protection of the minor. For Panama does not have protection laws for children. In the year 2017, during the 5th GNRC Global Forum, Global Network of Religions for Children, in the final declaration, more than 500 religious leaders from around the world expressed our commitment to work to generate greater social and political determination in terms of legislation, public policies, and increased funding for programs to protect children from violence. In May of the year 2018, religious leaders here in Panama offered support in the creation of a system of guarantees and comprehensive protection of the rights of children and adolescents, because we recognize it's a pending issue in our country and it's time to make it happen. We understand that for decades it has been warned that no country is immune to the reality of child abuse, that the various manifestations of violence can occur at home, at school, in care or justice institutions, in the community, or in digital environments, and that 50% of the population under 18 years of age has been a victim of violence in the home, mostly perpetuated by family members or close persons. Summarizing, sexual violence is one of the most degrading and cruel ways in which the rights of children and adolescents are violated, and is considered one of the most severe manifestations of inequality between children and adults. This form of violence violates the human rights and dignity, integrity, and development of children and adolescents. It is also the representation of abuse of power in which differences are translated into inequality for reasons of age or because of discrimination, subordination, or stereotypes that may be held about children. Sexual violence has multiple manifestations, ranging from physical behavior to other designations or typologies incorporated throughout new information and computer technologies. What is resilience? Resilience is to recognize as the capacity of human beings to withstand life traumas and emerge stronger from them. It also establishes the relationship between resilience and sexual violence, which is based on the fact that the former is a strategy for coping with the consequences of the latter. Resilience is based on three pillars: confidence, awareness, and independence. In this sense, children who are victims of sexual violence require certain internal faculties and environment that facilitates the consolidation of trust and the reconstruction of their life project. Faced with this, it can be observed that resilience appears as a strategy to cope with the psychological consequences of the traumatic event. And we can mention some consequences. First, the role of children in different societies has not varied according to conditions of vulnerability. Second, in situations of violence, sexual aggressions become more bloody and widespread in children and adolescents. Third, the impact on the mental health of children victims of this type of violence in the context of social networks become more acute. Depression, anxiety is more common, up to the consummation of suicidal ideas. Fourth, shame is the emotion that most influences the failure of resilience processes in victims of sexual violence, since the pillars of resilience, which are confidence, awareness, and independence, are not present in these emotions of shame. Talking about resilience in children who have been victims of sexual violence entails developing an intervention from the psycho-emotional, social, and physical aspects. Regarding the actions that allow building or facilitating resilience, I can mention, first, attention to children should be given with a differential approach, since the effects are not the same according to age group, ethnicity, or gender. Second, generate an environment where support is provided in network made up of family, friends, educational centers, churches, and other social actors. 3. Maintain an environment free of sadness so that it does not generate depression, product of negative situations that have been the cause of facing emotional instability. And 4, to look for sports and recreational activities to strengthen the emotional well-being of children who, due to various situations, have suffered damages as a result of sexual violence. What is the strategy? What do we do? According to some specialists, such as Jenny Bard, president of United for Children, or Deika Nieto from Red Namiapap, the network to support children and adolescents in Panama, it is necessary to start with the state's obligation to protect children and adolescents and to comply with the international convention to which the countries are signatories. As for family, parents are key figures in the protection of children and adolescents against sexual abuse. They should maintain good communication with the children, offer them a home free of violence, listen to them and listen to their opinions and take them into account. Not insist that they be greeted with kisses or hugs, and to supervise the television programs they watch and the sites they visit on the internet, among other resources and other measures. Sexual abuse must be fought with the same forcefulness with which any other pandemic is confronted. These are some recommendations. It is necessary to know how to analyze resilience as a strategy in children and adolescent victims of sexual violence in the context of the pandemic. Study and document the psychological and emotional aspects in children victims of sexual abuse through the resilience strategy. And 3, to advocate from our spaces so that the legislation in our countries has tools that guarantee timely judicial attention and lead to know the truth, to repair the inflicted damages and to their non-repetition and non-re-victimization, in addition to an adequate protection that provides the victims with the security to denounce without fear of being assaulted again by their perpetrators. How to facilitate healing? It is important to recognize that with help and understanding, children can heal. Not all children are affected the same way by sexual trauma. How you respond to your child can have a profound impact on how able they are to recover from abuse. By taking some early steps, you can help to strengthen the child's trust, sense of safety, and potential for healing. While children recognize unpleasant or frightening feelings, they may not have a full concept of child sexual abuse until they are adults. But children do best with a combination of love from caregivers and support from a counselor who have experience in sexual trauma. How to help children recover? You can, 1, tell the child that they are not to be blamed for the abuse. Shouldering guilt for the abuse and its consequences is an unfair burden for children to bear. Without intervention, they can suffer more serious and long-term emotional effects. More than ever, the child needs to know that you believe in him so they can trust you and count on you. By doing this, the child will reestablish a sense of trust and safety. Listen to them carefully. Let them express their feelings, answer their questions as best as possible, and comfort them. 4, make sure that the child knows that you are committed to taking care whatever steps to protect them. And 5, consider the help of a specialist who can offer help, guidance, and support to help the child recover. What to do? What is the strategy? According to the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, child abuse is a painful, traumatic family secret that has rippling effects upon the entire family. However, therapy for families who are impacted by sexual abuse can help them heal from the abuse and create tools to assure no further abuse will happen in their family and hopefully for generations to come. These are some recommendations. 1, over the last 2 decades, there have been a number of clinicians and researchers who have determined that a comprehensive treatment model that utilizes elements from both the child advocacy and family system approach can be the most effective. 2nd, a comprehensive program will treat all members of the family and include the larger legal and social justice systems as well. 3, The state must ensure the minimum guarantees for victims of sexual violence to have a space where therapy can be effective and mental health can be restored. If victims do not have treatment tailored to the disorders caused by sexual violence, the wounds will not heal easily, and the changes of overcoming the trauma as a motivating factor to embark on new paths are reduced. Most important, countries and the international community should be concerned with establishing mechanisms to prevent sexual violence against children. As Christians, we understand there is also inner healing, that we are deeply affected not only by what we do, but by what happens to us by the sins of others and the evil in the world. The healing of memories as well is also needed. As Christians, healing is a ministry that takes the incarnation seriously. The incarnation means that God is here. He promised to be with us always. Jesus Christ reveals himself, sharing our humanity. The basic element of healing is helping people to accept themselves and relationship to God. People will come to know God's love as you manifest it in your relationship with them. If you believe that you belong to God, they will know that they belong to him too, because you are in God's healing ministry. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4 and verse 23, it says, Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness among the people. Jesus was preaching, teaching, and healing. Preaching showed his concern for commitment. Teaching showed his concern for understanding. Healing shows his concern for wholeness. Understanding, wholeness, and commitment should also be part of the healing process. If those impacted by violence of the sexual abuse are left broken and excluded, that person can come to Jesus as they are, for he can heal and make them whole again. For Jesus loves you and wants you to be healed. And God's grace is the life that is in Jesus Christ. My great comfort is that Jesus understands abuse. He suffered great abuse and even death to give us life. He brings hope for today and tomorrow, and most certainly hope for dealing in victory with hurtful past circumstances. In short, Jesus did not heal people to prove that he was God. He healed them because he is God. The messages that we have shared may have to be repeated over a time and in different ways until the reality of sexual abuse is transformed into a reality of life abundant. I thank you.